Hallo zusammen, I'm your Vlog Dave. And since you guys actually really like my German lyrics analysis videos about German Rammstein songs and my, well, linguistic perspective on them, what makes them linguistically great, and, well, pretty much a German's take on Rammstein songs, I thought, you know what, let's actually, well, go a bit away from the song level of things and head over to the albums. My least favorite album, that is, and my most favorite album, and everything in between. Spoiler alert, choosing the worst, or my least favorite album, that is, and my most favorite album, that was easy, but everything in between, that was freaking tough. Let's actually talk about my favorites and my least favorite albums by Rammstein, and why. I want to actually reason my choices and why I prefer one album over another one. I also want to mention that I don't think Rammstein have really released a bad album. But with that being said, well, let's actually talk about my least favorite one. Sorry. Well, it's 1995's Herzeleid. I'm sorry, my dear heart. Das Herz, by the way. Now, a big reason, even though this might get criticized as being an unfair argument due to the fact it was their debut and they didn't have the financial background they have nowadays, of course, is I don't like the production value of the album as a whole. I don't like the sound of it overly much. I think it's pretty dry and thin, and therefore a bit powerless, and for my likings a bit too less powerful, if that makes sense, for the music Rammstein wants to play, especially compared to other albums by them and also to genre colleagues. Another thing that I'm not the biggest fan of is Till's early way of singing. I don't dislike it per se. I mean, I get that singing monotonously on purpose also creates a desired effect, and there is nothing wrong about that, don't get me wrong, but there are way less nuances to be heard in almost all songs, still. With the exception of Seemann, for instance, which showcases more of his potential. Huge potential and expressiveness that can also be heard on later albums, first and foremost. And that's something that I also prefer in other Rammstein records. They were able to bundle, to gather their creative potential way more on later albums. That applies to, let's say, soundscapes, dynamics, and more things, including music videos, but again, that's also down to the money you can spend and also partially to the directors. I guess if I had to express my overall thoughts on the album as a whole in one song, it would be Rammstein. I know why it appeals to many people, and it surely was a great live tune in the early days as well, Till wearing a burning stunt coat and all, but gotta be honest with you, it's largely monotonous in almost all musical territories, from the riffing to the rhythms to the vocals, etc. Nothing really outstanding about this one. One big reason I wouldn't say this is a bad album, though, quality-wise, at all, is the quality of the melodies and hook lines. Also, some of the lyrics are really creative and playful. For instance, the lyrics to Du riechst so gut, which have a pretty classy old German wording and almost, well, fairy tale-like character, you could say. Songs that I really like on this album include Asche zu Asche, Ashes to Ashes, Seemann, Sailor, and Du riechst so gut, You smell so good. Oh, you do. That leads us to my second least favorite Rammstein album as of today. And yeah, sorry. It's 1997's Sehnsucht. It's a good album, but I don't listen to it nearly as often as to other Rammstein records. And now that you've heard my thoughts on Herzeleid, you might also get why that is for me personally. I think overall it features more good and memorable Rammstein tunes, and also some classics, and definitely more than Herzeleid does. The production quality, even though it's not a whole lot better than Herzeleid, still has a more punchy, energetic sound to it, I think. Sound-wise, it's quite similar to Herzeleid, but it allows space for more experiments and, well, interesting sounds. Till still has his quite early, monotonous, really low and distinctive vocal style, but for some reason I think it suits the songs on here better and seems more natural sounding and less forced, but that's just my personal perception. With Engel, Angel and Du hast, You have, both songs which I've already talked about before, well, it features two all-time classics that Rammstein still play live to this day, and with reason. I've mentioned before that I'm not the biggest fan of the really simple Rammstein tunes in terms of musical complexity. I mean, steady drum beat throughout a whole song, not much variation on the instrumental side of things, but a song like Du hast is a perfect example of how this minimalistic approach to creating a certain sound can work perfectly fine and really stays in people's heads for years and years. To me, a big factor about this one in specific is also the really cool yet abstract music video. The same is true about Engel, which was the band's first really widely acclaimed single in Germany, as far as I recall. Even radio stations that weren't known for playing much rock, let alone metal music, really allowed this tune quite some airplay back in the day. Because of that, a whole new generation of music listeners were exposed to Rammstein and also liked, if not all, but at least this track. That's true, for instance, for my uncle, who usually doesn't listen to rock music at all. Judging alone from the importance to the band's evolution and career, it should probably be ranked way higher on this list, but I think there are quite some filler songs on Sehnsucht as well, especially in the second half of the album. Not bad songs, don't get me wrong, but not extremely good either. Next to Engel and Du hast, I especially like the opener and title track Sehnsucht, Longing or Craving, which also is a great example for how the use of more samples and certain sounds create a bigger and more dynamic atmosphere and experience. My third least favorite Rammstein album, and also the last one which I would consider, well, sort of below par, I have to give this one to Rosenrot from 2005. Maybe unexpected to some, since I've mentioned that I'm particularly not the biggest fan of the earlier, rather basic sound of the band. However, even though I once again wouldn't go as far to say, well, it's a bad album, I think the second half of this one isn't all that good either. With the clear exception of Zerstören though, to destroy, or destroying rather, which I consider one of the best and really heavy and uncompromising Rammstein tunes. Songs like Feuer und Wasser, Fire and Water, Hilf mir, Help me, or Ein Lied, a song, rather feel like, well, B-sides in a way to me, however, and in a way this would also fit the album's background, because it's basically the little brother to 2004's Reise Reise. The first few songs on Rosenrot are pretty cool in my opinion, especially the really underrated duet Stirb nicht vor mir, Don't Die Before I Do, which really has a ballady, emotional melody and harmony to it. A song like Benzin, Gasoline, is a legit opener, in that it's a powerhouse of a song, quite raw and brutal. But that being said, in a way, I've always felt that Rosenrot has always been hiding in Reise Reise's big shadow. It rather seems like a loose collection of songs rather than an album to me. One of the album's highlights though is the title track, Rosenrot, and mostly so because of the awesome lyrics, which are a nod to both the famous German fairy tale Heidenröslein by Goethe and Schneeweißchen und Rosenrot by the Brothers Grimm. Mann gegen Mann is another cool, energetic song, even though I usually don't think of it when I think of Rammstein singles for some reason. Doesn't stand out that much to me. So as I've said before, from now on, except for number 1 on this list, my favorite album by Rammstein, most favorite one, all the other albums could change positions depending on, well, what I feel about them on a daily basis. That is subject to change. Also because all of these albums are really different to each other. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's really tough to compare them necessarily. So let's continue with number 4 on this list, which basically is the middle position, a medium Rammstein album, although it really is far from being just medium quality. I'm talking about Mutter. In many ways, I would consider Mutter a transitional album for Rammstein. It was their first, even though still vague, dive into a more symphonic, more dynamic, broader sound, while also becoming more versatile in terms of rhythm and groove as a band. Mutter also was the first Rammstein album in the 21st century and even increased the band's already established popularity with songs like Ich will, I want, and especially with Feuer frei, Fire at Will, the powerful song that has become a massive live hit and was also featured in Triple X. I also love the enigmatic and mysterious sounding opener Mein Herz brennt, the slow and calm build-up, the string accents especially in the chorus, etc. And I'm really glad that this song finally became a single and, well, in a way earned itself a great music video when the band released their best of Made in Germany. Having watched that relatively new music video in comparison to when the song was first released as a part of Mutter in 2001, it still sounds as fresh and enigmatic today, and maybe the adjective fresh is another attribute I describe this album with. To me, it was a welcome change in style and approach, while still keeping some of their early trademarks. I also think that Till's expressiveness in terms of singing especially kept evolving from this album onwards. Definitely a really good album, and it's definitely the darkest sounding Rammstein album, I'd say. The third best Rammstein album, at least to me personally, at the moment, would be Liebe ist für alle da, from 2009. I was really struggling with how to rate Liebe ist für alle da, Mutter, and the upcoming second best one in direct comparison. I think all these albums are great for different reasons. For instance, Liebe ist für alle da has one, if not the most bombastic productions of all Rammstein albums. The wall of sound is thick and powerful, most of the songs have a driving groove to them, or even, in terms of the excellent Haifisch, Shark or Sharkfish, a dance vibe to them. Even though the vast majority on this album is really good, I think, there are also some less impressive tracks on this one. One of them, I know it's a single and I guess many people like it, is Pussy. If I were to choose one Rammstein song in which their provocative formula doesn't work too well, it would be Pussy. Of course, along with the pornographic video and the German-English mixture, with arguably lots of funny puns, it's supposed to please a wider audience, I guess, and I'm sure it's also what at least a part of Rammstein's fanbase wanna get from them or even expect, but this one rather sounds uninspired and even unoriginal in my ears. I guess the expression being provocative for the sake of provoking really fits this one. The vast majority on the album is really good. I don't know what it is with the second halves of Rammstein albums, respectively the last 2, 3 or 4 songs on certain Rammstein albums, but in most cases they seem weaker than the first half. Of course there are exceptions, but it's true for many of their records. In this case, I'm not the biggest fan of Roter Sand, for instance, or the aforementioned Pussy. I do like more though, especially the verses. Another obvious favorite of mine is Weidmanns Heil, which is a really fun song to listen to. I also vividly recall listening to this track for the first time and being pleasantly surprised by the heavy use of double bass in this song, in Liebe ist für alle da, the title track, and on other tracks as well. Wiener Blut sort of is the successor to Mein Teil on Reise Reise, since both tracks are based on real-life crime events in Germany and Austria. My second most favorite Rammstein album is, even though it's quite new still, Rammstein, their self-titled album. Oh yeah. As I've hinted before, on other days it's Liebe ist für alle da or Mutter. But now that the album is almost 1 year old, it definitely has found its place in my personal rating overall. I do agree with people though saying that this album lacks a certain heaviness the other albums rather had. I would actually categorize this album more as a rock album than a metal album, by the way, which doesn't say anything about the quality. However, even though I also really like the heavy Rammstein tunes, this album still works without these overly heavy tunes, I'd say. It's rather heavy on the lyrical side of things, if you will. For instance, when you think of Hallo Mann, it's a pretty good example for that, or Weit weg. In another, more historic way that also applies to both Deutschland, a really strong comeback single, and Radio, one of my personal favorites on the album. Nothing too provocative on this one either, which I also think of as a fresh and not too predictable approach. That is also true in regards to Ausländer, a song I didn't like too much at first listen, but one that has really grown on me. A fresh sounding blend of pop, electronic beats and typical Rammstein ingredients, which all leads into a really danceable tune with thought-provoking lyrics even. Zeig dich, Show Yourself and Tattoo are also two of my favorites on this album. The latter one especially reminds me of old school Rammstein, Du hast for instance, in a good way. Rammstein, or Untitled, still features a few symphonic elements, although way less so than other Rammstein records. I'd even say that this is probably the keyboard heaviest album by the guys to date, which I also like. It was about time that Flake can shine a bit more, I think. No song feels totally out of place. It's also a very mid-tempo oriented record with less up-tempo tracks. It also features the shortest Rammstein track to date, Diamant, even though the only ballad is not one of my favorites on this one. That, without, well, any bigger surprises now, if you've paid attention so far, leads us to my favorite album by Rammstein on a subjective level, but I truly think that objectively speaking, if you can actually speak objectively about those things, art in general, music and whatnot, Reise Reise is the best Rammstein album to date. It's them in their prime, honestly. To me, Reise Reise is pretty much the perfect blend of symphonic elements and metal, apart from purely symphonic metal bands like Nightwish, Epica or Within Temptation for instance, which I also really enjoy a lot. The eponymous opener is a clever track with a really thick, dense atmosphere and a great production. Whether it's the guitar sound, the balancing of the instruments in the mix, Till's really expressive yet not pretentious singing and intonation, the great lyrics which really fit the atmosphere of the track, the strings, and, which I consider a trademark element of this album in specific, the choir. Adding a choir to many of these songs, for instance Morgenstern, really lifts these tracks from really good metal songs to something even bigger, even more impressive. In a way, I'm sad that they haven't used choirs as much on other albums, but then again, it makes Reise Reise stand out and, well, makes it a special work. Mein Teil has a haunting, disturbing atmosphere, also because of the lyrics that are about a German cannibal called Armin Maivis. More about that in an upcoming lyric analysis video though. Dalai Lama is easily one of, well, if not the most underrated Rammstein tunes of all time. Again, a great haunting and solid atmosphere, especially in the chorus. I mean, come on, those little piano accents by Flake, great. I have to admit though that I'm also a little bit biased here because it was my first proper connection and proper introduction. I've listened to Engel on the radio in the late 90s, but back then I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, didn't pay direct and conscious attention to that, but that changed with Reise Reise. In 2004, when this album came out, I was 13 years old and I was really starting to listen to heavier music back then, with bands like Linkin Park, Evanescence, Nightwish and Rammstein. But apart from all of that, and comparing it with the other albums, I still think it's more or less their peak album to date, their best one. There is not one bad or really below par song on this album either. The chronological order of the songs also really works well. And I wonder, do you agree with my list or you do blah 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 blah? I wonder, and I would like to know if you agree with my list or if you disagree and why not, and everything in between and so. So yeah, feel free to let me know in the comments, give me your list. Thanks for watching everyone, I'm your Vlogdave, tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal. Rock on with Rammstein.